welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Taylor Rockwell. On today's episode, it's the return of the big thing. When the topic of the show involves one of the most successful coaches in world football, one of the biggest and most successful teams in Europe, and one of the biggest, most successful national teams in history, it probably requires a deeper look. And that's what we're doing today. After a turbulent season in Spain, Carlo Ancelotti is departing Real Madrid to become the latest name manager to coach a national team. And it's not just any national team, it's Brazil. He becomes their first non-Brazilian manager in the modern era and goes from a situation trying to manage big names like Vinicius, Rodrigo, and Endrick to a situation in which he's trying to manage big names like Vinicius, Rodrigo, and Endrick. How did we get here? How rough are Brazil at present? And what's the reaction been in the country? Later on in the episode, we'll be joined by The Athletic's Jack Lang to answer at least a couple of those questions. But we'll also take a look at Real Madrid's present position, the most likely name to take over, and the work that needs to be done to ensure the next season is brighter than the last. Here with me to talk it all out, a man who knows all Brazil needs is a good raised eyebrow. It's Joe Lowery. Hello, Joe.
I mean, and they need that raised eyebrow in particular. The thickness of it carries so much weight, just like Ancelotti does. I also love, excellent intro, Taylor. Very good stage-setting introduction. I still love the fact that Ancelotti is trading those three players for the same three players. It's just a great bit. I'm imagining them doing like a long, really like extensive goodbye. There's tears. Just the whole 9 yards. And then they go, and it's, oh, wait, this guy? Wait, we just did the whole thing. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Whatever.
It sounds like instead of tears and hugs goodbyes, it might have been Rodrigo with like a double bird salute walking out of the locker room and then looking at his phone and being like, oh no, I have made a mistake.
Hey, Carlo, my bad, dude. Sorry. my fault.
My blunder. Rounding out our crew, a man who has somehow not yet spoken. Well done to him. He was confident that the only thing Real Madrid needs is a great manager and a lot of new defenders and maybe a few midfielders. It's Graham Ruthven. Hi, Graham.
Hello, Taylor Rockwell. Yes, and another brains of the operation, because of course they're losing David Ancelotti as well, who has been the puppet master for the last few years, as we all know. And so it's not just the raised eyebrow that they're losing, although that is important, and that was top of Brazil's criteria. It was between Ancelotti and The Rock. They were also considering him for the role.
Tay Johnson's dad.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that's where we're at.
Graham, I saw that Davide Ancelotti is leaving Real Madrid. He is not going with his father. He's going to pursue other options, see what other club opportunities there are out there. And then the little addendum, and if nothing else presents itself, he'll join back up with his father in Brazil. What month of 2025 will he be coaching Brazil?
Well, whenever Rangers sack him from that job that apparently they're going to hire him to in the next couple of weeks. So good luck with that. Good luck with that, Davide Ancelotti.
All right, so we're going to stay on topic as best we can on this episode, but over on the Patreon, we do have a Patreon, TSS Plus. You should go join and be part of it because, as Ryan likes to say, it's where all the cool kids are hanging out, at least most of the cool kids.
Until you, listener or viewer, come on and hang out. Then we'll have all the cool kids. Yeah.
Joseph's better. Yeah. On that episode, we're going to be doing some transfer chat, transfer updates, and a little bit of speculation as well. Graham, can you tenuously connect that to this?
Dean Huijsen, that's how I'll do it. So actually, it's all happening, which is why we feel compelled to do some sort of transfer update on the Patreon feed. So there's Florian Wirtz's chat, which is linked to Real Madrid. They've thrown their hat into the ring for him. Dean Huijsen, as we're recording today, Real Madrid have apparently activated his release clause from Bournemouth. Do you think there's still a sense of novelty from Bournemouth that they're taking calls from clubs like Real Madrid for their players? But hey, that's where the Premier League is at. It's the real Super League. We've said it before. So yeah, there's a lot to discuss on that Patreon episode. So come and join us over there.
Please do. But for now, we're going to spend some time with Real Madrid, with Brazil, with Carlo Ancelotti. Let's start with Ancelotti and Real Madrid, Graham. We know for sure he is leaving, right? And it was all announced in ordered fashion and everybody was on the same page?
No, that's not at all what happened. It has not been confirmed by Real Madrid yet. It was confirmed by Brazil, the greatest national team in the world, as their official tweet called themselves, and the greatest manager in the history of the game, which is how they build Carlo Ancelotti. So that was a little bit awkward for Carlo Ancelotti, who had to face questions on his future, which has been confirmed by his next employer, but has not been confirmed by his current employer. We're just waiting for the Comunicado Oficial, which I would guess we will get within an hour of Real Madrid's final game of the season. Or maybe they'll do that before the last game of the season and allow him some sort of farewell, but that doesn't seem like the Real Madrid way. They don't really tend to do that sort of thing, so it might be a cold push in the back out the door for Don Carlo.
I hope they do it after he manages his first Brazil game. That's when they officially announce it. Let's just hold it off as long as possible. Graham, that does feel, in some strange way, like representative of what this season has been for Ancelotti at Real Madrid, where it seems like last summer he has promised reinforcement. He has promised more reinforcement than just Kylian Mbappe. They lose key players. It's already kind of a threadbare squad. They've got a lot of players on international duty. Then they've got an abbreviated preseason. Then they're back into it. He's promised players. He doesn't really get them. He's promised more players in January. He doesn't get them. And all along the way, there is some pretty clear communication back and forth between Madrid and Xabi Alonso. It just feels like it's sort of been a slow decline in that relationship over the course of the season.
Yeah, this has been rumoured for a long time. And basically, Ancelotti and Real Madrid have gone through the same cycle twice. Because last season, Brazil had him lined up to be their new manager. There were rumblings last season, midway through that campaign, that Real Madrid were ready to move him on. And then they won the Champions League and La Liga. This time, though, he hasn't had those successes. And from about February this year, it has really felt like this is the end of a cycle for Ancelotti at the club, to such an extent that the reporting around that time was even if Real Madrid won the Champions League this season, they were ready to move on from Carlo Ancelotti. A lot of the problems that you kind of list there, Taylor, that have panned out this season are nothing to do with Carlo Ancelotti. Yep. And last season, I actually thought there's this idea that we feed into ourselves from time to time, that there's this idea that Ancelotti is more vibesy than a lot of other managers at the top level, and some of that might be true in some sense. But I look at last season and the way that he set up that team when he had some real challenges figuring out what that side was. Real Madrid didn't have a top-level centre-forward. They didn't replace Karim Benzema going into the season. They didn't have a left-back for a lot of the season. They didn't have an orthodox number 10 or like a high creator on the ball. But he settled on this split striker system with Jude Bellingham as a de facto number 9 from midfield, which I don't think anyone saw coming, and it was hugely effective. And he used Camavinga at left back, and that then meant he can move him into central midfield. That then freed up Bellingham to get forward. It was all very functional, and Real Madrid, as I say, won the league and the Champions League double. But this season, they played him a hospital pass. They gave him Kylian Mbappe, which was a great signing on the face of it, but there are issues with how you fit him into the forward line. I think a bigger issue was they didn't replace Toni Kroos, who arguably had the best season of his career last season for Real Madrid, so they don't have that midfield rhythm builder. And Ancelotti envisaged a lot of the issues they would face in defence as well, where obviously they have a lot of injuries this season. I think basically every single member of their starting back four has been out for a period this season. But Ancelotti pushed for the addition of a new central defender last year. They wanted Lenny Yoro. That was the central defender they had lined up. Obviously, Manchester United beat them to that punch. They don't go for an alternative, and all of a sudden, Real Madrid this season have been playing central midfielders in central defence. And Raul Asensio has been promoted from Castilla, and he's done okay, but you can see some rawness in his game. So, Carlo Ancelotti has ultimately paid for this season with his job. And I think on both parts there is a willingness to move on and experience something new. I think that just a sense of boredom has kind of set in, certainly for Real Madrid, who just want to experience something new. But a lot of the things he has been blamed for this season, I don't think are really his fault.
Joe, would you agree with that sentiment?
100% agree. Yeah, injuries have been a huge factor, and Graham got to that. You just think about the names. You think about Militao and Alaba and Camavinga and Carvajal, and I mean, like the defensive pieces that Graham was referencing. Yeah, it's been a huge problem. And you look at how Real Madrid have struggled against Barcelona this year. They're just not at their best. This Real Madrid squad is not at its best. There have been some things done, and The Athletic had a great write-up about some of the factors behind Ancelotti moving on. The center-back conversation was weaved all throughout that piece. One of the first bits of the piece was, Real Madrid never replacing Joselu. And it's like, well, hold on a second. They did do that. They got Kylian Mbappe, and that's all fine. The issues were really deeper downfield. And the puzzle of the attack is a part of this too, of course, but I don't think it is anywhere near the primary concern. Real Madrid's expected goal tally this year, even not being done with the season, already better this year than it was last year. Now, they have allowed more chances, and Mbappe's lack of pressing from the front. That same Athletic article cited Real Madrid sources imagining that having Mbappe up front was going to cost them 15 extra goals this season, which feels insanely high to me. But I think there is something to that idea of having a player who is a piano player, not a piano carrier, and you have to accommodate him. that makes it harder to defend as a unit. Real Madrid have allowed more chances. They have struggled defensively. Mbappe probably does play a part in that. A much larger part of that is the fact that they've had just a husk of a defensive core out there on the field. So I completely agree with Graham. This feels like both parties were kind of ready for what's next. And obviously Real Madrid have the ultimate say here because they can fire Ancelotti, and that's all fine. But Ancelotti has clearly seen this Brazil job as being attractive, is clearly ready to do something different. And Real Madrid with Xabi Alonso hanging out in the corner, just kind of waiting for his moment, they are more than happy to move on and start something new.
Graham, how much of an understanding do you have of Real Madrid's finances? I'm not asking for like a complicated financial audit or anything like that, but I remain confused about their acquisitions or lack thereof. Like the Lena Yoro one you mentioned, it's not just that they're beaten to the punch. I think their offer was half of what Manchester United offer, and this is for a player that Real Madrid scouts had identified as a potentially, or I think they just straight up said, labeled him a generational talent. Whether or not you agree with that categorization is your own feeling, but I think it's representative of a player that they had identified, scouted, recognized, we want this guy no matter what, and then ended up not kind of splashing the cash. And that this was a consistent thing for them and has been, to the extent that they were trying to get Liverpool in January to basically agree to like let Trent Alexander-Arnold go early, or like to see if there was a way to get him out for a cut rate price because they needed somebody but didn't want to spend. And so I'm confused if that is Real Madrid not being able to spend, Real Madrid being hesitant to spend, or Real Madrid being hesitant to spend while Carlo Ancelotti is manager.
So my understanding of Real Madrid's finances are they have huge debt, but also huge revenue, and the renovation of the Bernabeu. I saw some figures on the match day, or not even the match day revenue that Real Madrid are getting, the what would you call it, events revenue, because that stadium is now hosting concerts during the summer, a whole of other sporting events. The Bernabeu is generating a gigantic amount of revenue for Real Madrid. It's going to continue to give them an advantage over rivals. It's what everyone is chasing. It's why Manchester United are trying to redevelop Old Trafford. It's what Spurs have tried to do with their stadium. But Real Madrid have seemingly been more successful. I think they've had like SmackDown at the Bernabeu, which was a huge revenue generator. So I think for the time being, they can spend. Like, keep in mind, they went and spent 100 million euros on Jude Bellingham a couple of years ago. Like, they do still spend money. They just are not able to spend the sort of money that Chelsea are able to spend, or even maybe like a Liverpool or PSG, certainly. So I think it's about balancing things where they've got Trent Alexander-Arnold as a free agent this summer. Of course, they're going to be paying him a fortune and wages, which always needs to be factored in. But that is why they're in the Florian Wirtz discussion. He is very much still under contract at Bayer Leverkusen, who apparently want between 150 million euros and 100 million euros. Real Madrid, if that player decides to go to Real Madrid, it seems like they are willing and able to spend that money this summer.
So seems like they will need to, given the lack of options and the consistent injuries last season. So we can wonder how they will look next season in a bit. Right now, though, how do we feel like Joe Ancelotti is going to be remembered, perceived by Real Madrid faithful? Because he's in his second stint. This season obviously does not go well. They lose to Barcelona, I want to say 104 times in one season. Correct. So that might be...
Yeah, that was the number of times they were caught offside, Kylian Mbappe, in that one game.
Thank you. That is the correct number. Joe, thank you for keeping me on track.
You're welcome.
And so it is a rough season, but then at the same time, he wins, 2 league titles, he wins 3 Champions Leagues, he wins 2 Copa del Reyes in this stint. He's done even more than that previously. So it does seem like maybe he deserves a bit of flowers.
I mean, certainly, and I'm happy to give him those flowers. I will remember him as a guide to his team's most recent pair of Champions League trophies, right? I mean, then you can toss the one that he won with them more than a decade ago. I am very much, Ancelotti is heavily vibes-based, so I'll toss that in there. Tactically, I'm not inclined to give him a ton of credit. He is like the non-dollar store version of Bruce Arena in terms of how he sets teams up. You can see the logic in how he sets them up, right? That structure that Graham referenced last season in that 4-4-2 diamond with Bellingham as that sort of real 9 but not really a 9, where he's moving forward out of midfield. The system made a ton of sense and was very effective. When you watch Real Madrid press and you watch them build, it's like, Graham is laughing there because at times it's comical, right? I think Ancelotti is a fascinating managerial character. In some ways, he is one of the last vestiges of his era, but he is also a legend. And I do think he'll be remembered that way by Real Madrid fans as a legend. Forget the tactical stuff, right? I don't think that's going to play in much at all. But he is a giant in the managerial ranks. His personality, the eyebrows, even though we're joking about them, it's real. Like, he has this persona about him that makes him, I think, one of the more likable coaches in the game. And he has had success at Real Madrid in a very real way. Yes, this season was a failure by Madrid standards. There's no doubt about that. And Real Madrid fans will remember that because they only have so many seasons of having their club in their lifetime, and each one gets remembered because that's how much they care. But I have a hard time imagining that folks wouldn't think about Carlo Ancelotti sort of like I've just laid out that I think about Ancelotti. He is one of the foremost managers in the game, and I think he'll be remembered that way.
I certainly think he will be. How do I frame this? I think there might be a difference between how he's perceived outside Real Madrid and how he's perceived inside Real Madrid. I think his general reputation is he's a legend, like one of the most legendary managers of all time, and he will be remembered as a Real Madrid legend by Real Madrid fans as well. I also think to a certain extent they'll remember him as just another one. And Real Madrid are fascinating as a club in that regard. Like they are not like other clubs. Their fans see managers and players as servants to the club. Like the club is here, and it's just about whoever is at that club at that time. So if you go to the Bernabeu, and I've been lucky enough to go a couple times, from what I can remember, when I thought about it, when I was thinking about this question in preparation for this episode, when I thought about it, like there were no billboards of former legends, or there's no like banners hanging down from the ceiling of the roof of the Bernabeu, or songs about former players. Like it's possible I'm just not understanding the songs, but I'm not. Manchester United fans sing Viva Ronaldo about Cristiano Ronaldo, or they sing like about Liverpool fans sing about former players. At Real Madrid, I'm not aware of them doing that in the same way. So. He's a legend, and he'll be welcomed back in the director's box, and he's got his place in the history of this club. But we're not talking about Jurgen Klopp leaving Liverpool here. It's a very different kind of emotion, I think.
I think you've nailed it there, Graham. And a lot of that, I do think has to do with the way the club identifies itself and perceives itself. But there is also, to Joe's point, the kind of individuality of Carlo Ancelotti. And that was another Athletic piece I saw that was basically talking about how, like, for a manager of his profile with his success rate, how few disciples, if any, he has. And it does sort of speak to the idea that, like, he is unique. He is a manager who somehow is able to kind of get the best out of players, and I think embolden players with instruction, but not tactical instruction. It feels like it's a lot of like, you can do it, go on and do it. And then they do, and somehow that works. But I do imagine that is difficult to replicate. And so it's an odd one that with all the silverware he has won in his 2 stints at Real Madrid, it also does feel like he will not be the first name people think of when they think of Real Madrid managers 10 years from now.
Yeah, Graham, I love that you said he'll sort of be another one, because he is. And when you're Real Madrid, even when you're killing Mbappe coming through, and you're one of the greatest players on the planet, I think you said it really well. He's just another one in the line of superstars that they've had. Ancelotti is another one in the line of coaches that they've had. I think he's another one of the legends that they've had. But it's a really good distinction to make, because Real Madrid have drawn that quality and that level of really recognizable names and faces that. Yeah, it is not necessarily that Ancelotti stands out from some of the best that have come before him, but he does stand out in the context of global soccer.
All right, well then I think we've done a good job of summarizing Carlo Ancelotti's time with Real Madrid and why things maybe ended the way they have, or theoretically ended. We're waiting for Real Madrid to issue that statement still. When we come back, we're going to talk about what comes next for Real Madrid. Welcome back to the Total Soccer Show. When last we left you, Carlo Ancelotti was still in charge of Real Madrid. Graham, any updates? Still there?
I think so. Yeah, I can sense the eyebrows. But updates from, I believe, starting last October, maybe last June, tell me that Xabi Alonso could well be on the way, is the most likely person to take over Real Madrid this summer. And I think that is partially why the news that Ancelotti is leaving has been sort of, it hasn't been blown over. It hasn't been sort of like a non-issue. But I think to lose a manager who is as successful as he has been would be a bit of like, okay, now what? Like, this is a transitional moment. If we're saying this is the squad maybe at an end and the cycle needs to start again, who's going to be the guy to do it? And if you don't have somebody that you can perceive as a slam dunk, I think it becomes a much more dramatic thing. But Joe, given that it's Xabi Alonso coming in, former player, has had success with Bayer Leverkusen,
is pretty well liked and pretty well respected, it feels like that has cushioned the blow somewhat.
Yeah, it's the worst kept secret in soccer, right? Even Ancelotti's talking about Xabi Alonso in his pressers. He said recently, quote, "I have a lot of affection for Xabi Alonso. I don't have a lot of advice to give him because he has all the tools to be a great coach in the future." Nice. I love that. Everybody knows this is happening, even though it's not official yet. ESPN reporting that both Real Madrid and Xabi Alonso are eager for him to start ahead of the Club World Cup, so he will be coaching, it sounds like, at that tournament for Real Madrid. Yeah, Taylor, I totally agree with you. I think there is this natural sense for everybody that it's kind of the end of Ancelotti's era. He's ready to move on. Real Madrid are ready for him to move on. And you don't have to do all the articles about who's the next manager going to be. I mean, they still exist because it's a click goldmine. But who's the next Real Madrid coach going to be? And how is this all going to play out? And that brings up Ancelotti's departure. No, everybody knows where this is going. Now, what we don't know is how it's going to go. One thing we know is that Real Madrid have an incredibly talented squad, but Xabi Alonso is a very, very different manager than Carlo Ancelotti. He is a far more structured coach than Ancelotti. He is a coach who likes to drill more complicated tactical systems into his team than just, all right, lads, I believe in you. Here's your basic structure. Go out there and be the best players in the world. And Graham, you and I were talking before we started recording. This is sort of a cycle for Real Madrid where they at times vacillate between the Ancelottis of the world and Jose Mourinho sort of letting his players go out there and play, and someone like Lopetegui who comes in and wants to install a more detailed tactical system. Alonso with Leverkusen has a very clear structure, and we talked about this last week in his 3-4-3 shape that he uses most often. Very clear principles in terms of how they build from the back and how they progress through midfield. I mean, those things don't really exist right now for Real Madrid. So it's not as if it's going to be the most natural of transitions. It could turn out to be a great transition for everybody, or Real Madrid could have some problems early on next season and maybe even a little bit longer than that. This will make them interesting. This will make them more interesting, in my opinion. I don't know that it's going to make them better than Barcelona, which is a totally different kettle of fish.
It's going to make the Club World Cup interesting. I hate that. I mean, I was already going to watch that tournament, but I hate that it is giving everyone a reason to watch that competition to see how Alonso does in his first tournament as Real Madrid manager. I find this interesting, this appointment. I find it interesting from the Real Madrid side of things. I also find it interesting from the Xabi Alonso side of things. The timing of it is interesting because last summer, when he rejected Bayern and Liverpool, maybe he didn't reject an offer from Liverpool, but you can't convince me otherwise that if he'd communicated to Liverpool that he was interested, they would have gone for him ahead of Arne Slot, which obviously worked out quite well for Liverpool. But the narrative was at that time, it was that he was being wise to wait for the right club and the right opportunity, that he wasn't going to rush the next step in his career, and he said something about being able to build more success at Leverkusen, which obviously didn't really happen this season. So I wonder, in taking this job now, I wonder if he's making this leap because he fears that maybe stock could drop if Leverkusen have another season like this season, where there are more. And look, Leverkusen performed to the mean this season. They overperformed last season, but the way that soccer works and the way that narratives work in soccer, you would then have like two slightly underwhelming seasons compared to a successful one and winning the title. I'm not sure that taking the Real Madrid job at this point adds to the idea that Alonso is being careful plotting his career path. This is a seriously risky job for him to take, and I'm super interested in how it's going to pan out. I'm not certain it's going to work out well for Xabi Alonso for a number of reasons. When I look at the squad and look at how his Leverkusen team play, and you can look at things like the formation. Obviously, he's played a 3-4-3 at Leverkusen, which does not work for this Real Madrid squad at all. In fact, it kind of exacerbates the issues that they have as a squad, where all of a sudden they need an extra centre back, and all of a sudden they're not playing any high wingers, which is the sort of player that they've got coming out of their ears. But I then look back at his Real Sociedad B team, and he's been able to adapt. He used a back four. He played a 4-3-1 at that team. But just in terms of his principles and his values as a coach, it's not a good fit for Real Madrid. They're a bad pressing team. They're not great on the ball. Those are things Xabi Alonso wants his teams to be. So it's a risky job for him to take. And as Joe referenced, you look at the history of Real Madrid, they kind of oscillate between these two extremes. And even within single managers, like Jose Mourinho in his first season at Real Madrid tried to play Mourinho ball, like suffer ball. It didn't work. And after one season, he went vibes and they won the league. So there's just something about this club that is intangible. And I wonder if Xabi Alonso will be able to handle that.
Two questions there, Graham. The first, with that in mind, with the reference to Mourinho, and I think about was it Koeman who everybody got mad about for playing a back three with Barcelona?
Yes.
Like, is there a style that is untenable for Real Madrid supporters, do you think? Like, if they are, I'm assuming if they are bunkering behind the ball with one player up top and not trying to attack at all, that's probably not going to go over well, but are there formational things that a manager has to do, or is it kind of a bit more open?
I don't think there's anything formational or tactical. Like, obviously, Real Madrid have to be a good attacking team. Like, they need to score goals. The thing is, though, Taylor, when you say, would they accept bunkering and having one up front? Like, Real Madrid have done that recently. Yeah. It's just the one up front has been Vinicius Jr. or Kylian Mbappe, who you can send into open space and they do something on their own. So as long as they continue to have that threat, I think Xabi Alonso is going to have complete freedom to do whatever he wants at Real Madrid. It's just whether he is going to be able to do that.
That is the big thing, right? And I said earlier, like, it represents a slam dunk or at least on paper. Like, it's a former player who is a well-regarded former player who had lots of success, has really only had success at club level, then goes into management, does really, really well. Now he's moving back, has won a league title. It ticks a lot of boxes. And yet, different formation, different approach, different group of players, very different group of egos, and then also some of the players that are still there he played with. And that can be a strength. It can also be a weird thing when your former teammate is now screaming at you to run sprints. Like,
who are the ones he played with? Danny Carvajal surely is one.
Luka Modric, I believe.
Luka Modric
would be the other one. Yeah, at least there's two. I think there might be three.
Courtois, maybe potentially. He's been there for a while. But I hadn't thought
Joe,
of that.
Numbers, you know these things. But I think then there's also the idea that at Leverkusen there seems to have been a bit like his feedback was invited, put it that way, when it came to decision making on transfers, but also on scheduling and training and preseason tours and the like. It seems like he enjoyed a strong relationship with the board in which his input was considered. His needs were sort of attempted to be fulfilled, if not fulfilled outright. You go to Real Madrid, I mean, we talked about it already with Ancelotti, that is not a thing that they were doing to the level that it felt like he was almost frozen out at times this season when it came to the big decisions and promoting youth players and the way they were going to bring them through and the lack of signings. Basically, you're throwing Xabi Alonso into a pressure cooker where there is already massive expectation. Yeah. There's also not a ton of support behind him, and there's not a huge squad behind him either. So it's a slam dunk on paper. Less so off paper, Joe.
I mean, yeah, it's just hard to say how this is going to go, right? I mean, I think that Xabi Alonso is a very smart coach. I think he does, in some ways, occupy the middle of this Venn diagram that works well for Real Madrid, where he's a name, and that's helpful because you need a name to sort of corral some of these egos. But he also is someone who has been quite successful throughout his managerial career so far. But this will be the first time that Xabi Alonso isn't the biggest name at his club since he's become a manager, right? This is the first time that's happened for him. Yeah. There is a power shift that happens whenever someone goes to coach Real Madrid because odds are, whether the club is bigger than you, whether Florentino Perez is bigger than you, or in this case, whether Kylian Mbappe is bigger than you, all of those things are true for Xabi Alonso. I would still bet on, if he's given enough time, Xabi Alonso will do quite a good job with this Real Madrid team because I think he is a very, very astute coach. I think he has earned this opportunity with having the success that he's had at Leverkusen. That Leverkusen team last year was awesome. Like, truly, they're one of the best teams I've seen play in a long time without the talent that you have at Real Madrid. And so if Xabi Alonso can have enough time, if Barcelona just don't stop Real Madrid for the next 2 seasons or whatever it is, which could well happen, by the way. It works against Xabi Alonso that Barcelona, despite spending themselves sick in all sorts of ridiculous ways, have somehow continued to develop elite talents like Lamine Yamal and find the Rafinhas of the world and have become maybe the best team on the planet despite the fact that they're out of the Champions League. That's a huge problem for Xabi Alonso narratively, and that matters to Real Madrid. Whether or not it should is a different story, but it does. I think if he gets enough time, he will mold this Madrid team into something that is like a more 2025, soon to be 2026 version of Real Madrid, like that is more in keeping with modern times, while also bending to fit the fact that he actually has players that need to be accommodated tactically. So I would lean towards, this is going to work. But would it shock me if this doesn't work? Absolutely not.
For all the tactical and personnel issues that we've kind of outlined, I think, to your point, Joe, Barcelona, Xabi Alonso's biggest issue.
Yeah.
Because I think Barcelona have a generation of young players who are going to get better and better. They're going to mature. There's a possibility they add a couple more that emerge from La Masia, or maybe for once Barcelona are smart in the transfer window and they add a couple other key players. I wouldn't count on that. But if you look at the last Barcelona golden generation, Real Madrid were also really good at that time. They were right there with them for a lot of their... Obviously, that's the Cristiano Ronaldo, Karim Benzema era. They set club points records. It was just that they were up against this incredible Barcelona team. And if you look at the number of managers Real Madrid had at that time, they rifled through managers because Barcelona was the standard. It's always the standard for Real Madrid, and vice versa as well. If you're Barcelona, Real Madrid is the standard. So that's where most of my worry would be for Xabi Alonso. Like, if he's inherited this squad that has been constructed weirdly, and I think they're going to make a lot of signings, or a good number of signings this summer that might address some of those things. But the issue with the team is he's got a collection of some of the greatest players in the world. He just can't fit them into a structure. That's still like a decent... That's a problem that most managers would love to have. The Barcelona thing is what could set the narrative for him in a really negative way.
Yeah, and I talked about this on listener questions last week, but one of these problems for Alonso, and you referenced it there, Graham, is the fact that he has a number of unique players to fit into his team and to figure out a way to make this work. Mbappe is a positionless piano playing forward. Jude Bellingham is like an 8.5, where he's not a center mid, but he's also not a number 9. But you want him to be further upfield, but you also want him to do some ball progression. Alexander-Arnold is a right back who's not a right back, and having those three players in a team at the same time in a way that also makes them functional is not easy. At least not easy to do overnight. So I can see this taking some time, which I think is going to make Real Madrid incredibly interesting for the next year plus.
If I was like adding an intangible argument to this, I would say that like a thing that is very much in his favor is that I can't put it any way other than like he is cool. Xabi Alonso, like he's always been, going back to his playing days, he's always, maybe it's the X in the name that starts it, but he's always felt like a very intelligent player who makes the right decisions, both in terms of on the field, but also in terms of his career, such that he wins silverware constantly. But he is like a handsome man. He is a good coach, like in terms of with his Leverkusen team and getting everybody to play the same way tactically and winning the league. But you don't have... He's not like a very animated guy. He's not going crazy on the sidelines. He's not Julian Nagelsmann wearing like strange outfits. He just seems very steady. There are not a lot of entry points to attacking him, is I guess the best way I can put it. And I think of him similar to Carlo Ancelotti in being a little bit stoic, a little bit unemotional, but kind of suave and kind of cool. Zinedine Zidane maybe had the same vibes as manager of Real Madrid. There is a like an appeal to like the perception of him being a stoic, I think, that it like will go some way towards keeping the wolves from the door if things don't start electrically.
The Zidane comparison is really interesting, Taylor, because one of the qualities that apparently Zidane had in the dressing room, and you can imagine this was true, was that he's Zinedine Zidane. Yeah. So if you were talking to Cristiano Ronaldo or whoever, you are going to listen. He has authority. You're going to listen to him. Xabi Alonso wasn't up to the same level as Zinedine Zidane. He was one of the best midfielders of his generation, but he had a certain quality. People thought of him as like the thinking man's midfielder.
Yes.
Which is what then leads into this idea that, oh, well, he's a quality manager. So, and even on the training pitch, like, do you remember that video of him at Leverkusen where he was just pinging passes?
Insane.
So when a manager can do that, like, look, I'll show you how it's done, and then he's skimming passes into centre forwards, like, it gives you a natural authority over
really
players.
It does. Dude, just to emphasize, for people who haven't seen that, It's not just like the coach doing the layoff drill and the player smashes it into the goal. It's him at an angle from 40 yards out, just pinging these backspin balls perfectly into the path of the onrushing attacker to score from 12 to 18 yards out. But they are always perfectly struck over and over again. You're totally right, Graham. You watch your coach do that a few times. You're like, all right, maybe I'll press a little bit to this guy. We'll see what happens. So I think there's a lot to like about it. And I think also some of the criticism I had for Real Madrid in the final year of Ancelotti, you could then flip and say, yeah, once they recognized they weren't going to extend him, he wasn't going to be the guy past this season, why would you go out and spend a ton of money on center backs if they don't fit stylistically with what your next manager is going to want? If you're able to get that next manager, why would you spend a ton of money on central midfielders if they're not going to fit stylistically? So I can get that. The story that they were offered Kyle Walker and didn't even entertain it is a bit confusing because I do think he would have made Real Madrid better and more consistent this season. But
dumb Kyle Walker.
Is
We're talking about dumb.
Yes, excuse me. Of course. Maybe that's why they knew. Yes, the thinking man's footballer Xabi Alonso wouldn't want dumb Kyle Walker running around.
Also, if you've watched Kyle Walker for AC Milan since he's joined them on loan, I might dispute the idea that he'd improve Real Madrid. Right. He's been pretty bad, but I take your point.
Is Xabi Alonso the manager of Real Madrid at this point next season? I ask you both.
Oh, yeah. Graham, you're hesitating.
Just Real Madrid, man.
I couldn't tell Joe if he was hesitating or frozen. That's how still he was in his thoughts.
I think 100% he will be the manager of Real Madrid next season.
I'll say yes, but I'm not willing to go to 100%. I'll say like 75%. I still think there's a 1 in 4 chance that he's a Lopetegui and tries and puts the system on this team. But I also said Arne Slot would have a difficult first season at Liverpool, and they strolled the Premier League title race. So what do I know?
All right. Final other question that calls for speculation. To Joe's point, Xabi Alonso, the biggest name at Bayer Leverkusen, with maybe some argument in there, but not really. Like he is the name there. Now he goes to Real Madrid, who are Real Madrid, and there's this guy Kylian Mbappe. Like, how do we think that's going to play out? Because that is not a type of player, a pedigree of player he has experienced before, nor is it an attitude he has experienced before. Put it that way. So, Joe, do you see how much concern do you have about that relationship needing to work?
I don't have a lot of concern compared to where we've been on Kylian Mbappe, I suppose. I think Kylian Mbappe is a little bit temperamental. I think Kylian Mbappe is a guy who wants the system to be catered to him. And if Alonso plays his cards right, there's probably a way to make that happen. But there's still going to be this power struggle that Mbappe seems to have everywhere he goes. They're still going to need to accommodate him. That's going to be the same. That's the way it was this year. And Mbappe still scored a bunch of goals for Real Madrid. So I don't have expressed concerns about Mbappe in like solely about him. But I have concerns about how, as I said earlier, Alonso fits in Mbappe and Bellingham and Alexander-Arnold along with Vinny Jr. and the other pieces that he's going to have to fit into this team because they've come with an expectation of being key parts. So, yeah, that problem is going to be real. I don't think the Kylian Mbappe situation is going to be different. I certainly don't think it's going to be worse. And there's a chance if Ancelotti pushes the right buttons on the field that it could end up being better.
Graham, for you, any concerns?
He's not going to press. Is one thing. Like if Luis Enrique wasn't unable to, have you seen that video of him in the video analysis room, like basically screaming at Kylian Mbappe about his role in the team, and he basically just ignored him. So if that didn't work, I'm not entirely sure Xabi Alonso is going to be able to do anything. So he's going to have to build a team that can survive and compensate for that. I'm interested in seeing, and look, I kind of made this prediction at the top of the year, like someone's going to be squeezed out. Rodrigo looks like being that player now, based on the reporting that apparently, and this is slightly rumour based, but apparently he refused to come on in the Clásico, which is why other players came on ahead of him. He's unhappy at Real Madrid. That seems like maybe something that might move this summer. Some other players as well, it seems likely will be squeezed out. Lucas Vazquez, David Alaba, potentially. So I'm interested not just in the incomings, because it feels like Real Madrid are being really active in the transfer market already. They've got Alexander-Arnold wrapped up. They've got Dean Huijsen, today we're learning, pretty much wrapped up. Milos Kerkez is apparently on the radar. They're going to sign a left winger, and they're active for Florian Wirtz. But the outgoings are going to be interesting as well, because we might get an even better idea of the team, the profile of the team, and also the character of the squad that Xabi Alonso wants to mould with some of those players that end up leaving.
All right, there we are. Well, that feels like a good place to end it with Real Madrid. We shall see what happens. I'm guessing we'll talk about Xabi Alonso's appointment once or twice over the next year. For now, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll be speaking to Jack Lang about Ancelotti's appointment in Brazil, how it's been perceived, and the work ahead of him. Back soon. Welcome back to the Total Soccer Show. We have lost a Joe, but we've gained a Jack. Jack Lang joins us from The Athletic to talk about Brazil and Carlo Ancelotti in some level of order. Jack, thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
And we're very excited to have you because we pay attention to Brazil, as I think most people do, when it comes to major tournaments, maybe sometimes with World Cup qualifying, although that tends to be a foregone conclusion. So catching people up, it's been smooth sailing and it's all totally cool with Brazil these days?
Yeah, everything's fine. Nothing's on fire, and no one is clinging to their job. Brazil, to be fair, I think even the most part-time observer of Brazil will have gleaned that things haven't been going great, right, over the last 20 plus years. So it's a long old time. That's the headline, isn't it? Brazil haven't won the World Cup. since 2002. It's going to be 24 years when the World Cup starts. That's a very long time for Brazil. And don't Brazilians just know it? So there is a kind of rolling psychodrama, I suppose, that surrounds the national team, a kind of a mix of superiority complex and inferiority complex, which, in my eyes at least, has made it, makes Brazil one of the most interesting football cultures to follow, and the national team kind of embodies all of it.
And now that national team will be coached by Carlo Ancelotti, according to Brazil, not yet according to Real Madrid. We'll see when that changes. But for now, Carlo Ancelotti comes in. What has the reaction been that you've seen, given that they pursued him? It didn't work last time. Now here he is.
I think twofold, really. There is obviously excitement. He is, I think, by some distance, the best coach Brazil could have hoped for at this moment in time. Brazil have gone through 3 coaches since the last World Cup. So it was always likely that Chichi, who took them to the last 2 World Cups, would depart after Qatar. And yet Brazil's kind of succession planning was non-existent at best, I would say. So that they were always looking at Ancelotti. He was always the kind of the white whale. They knew they couldn't get him initially, so they appointed a guy like the under-20 manager on a temporary contract. When that ended, Ancelotti still didn't come, so they brought in a guy called Fernando Diniz, who shared the Brazil job with a club job, which is, frankly, crazy thing to have let happen. And then even then, after he left, Ancelotti still wasn't ready, so they bring in kind of the next best option in Brazilian club football, who was Dorival Jr., who was not very good at the job. So compared to those guys, Ancelotti is, they're not even comparable really. So Brazil, they know they have got an elite coach. 1 year from a World Cup, it's not a lot of time, but obviously it's better to have a great coach playing catch up than it is to have a mediocre coach playing catch up. So I think there is that base level of excitement, right, we've got a good one here. Let's move it forward. On the other hand, there is this kind of realism or pessimism that I think has crept into the Brazilian game in the last 10 years maybe. Brazil were always kind of, for a long time, even as the national team wasn't winning, there was a bullishness about the way they looked out into the football world. Like, it was characterised by all these old, 50, 60, 70-year-old coaches. Vanderlei Luxemburgo is the best example, saying things like, Brazil has nothing to learn from Europe. Brazil has nothing to learn from the best European coaches. We should plough our own furrow. I think there's kind of a yo-yo between harking back to the past and harking forward to the future, which generally is seen as a European style of football or coaching. But at the moment, prior to Ancelotti, they're definitely in the kind of in a swing of, oh my God, we need to sort this out. Like, it's been so long. There are no good coaches. And so Ancelotti coming in, it's good, but it's not going to solve everything. They've left him very little time to even turn the side around, let alone bring about cultural change. And so I think already, even, it seems crazy to say before he's joined, but already there is a slight feeling of opportunity missed, that this could have been so much more transformative to Brazilian football.
And Jack, where does the Brazilian media and the Brazilian support as a whole sit on that swing that you're talking about between Brazil being bullish on believing in, Brazilian coaches and Brazilian soccer not having anything to learn from European soccer, and the realism of Ancelotti perhaps being the only person who can get this team to potentially challenge for a World Cup? Because am I right in saying that this is the first non-Brazilian manager that the national team has had since the 40s, so like the modern era? And obviously we have seen the reaction from certain sections of the English media to Thomas Tuchel coming in as the England manager. Has there been anything comparable to that, or does Brazil's situation mean that he has been welcomed with open arms by everyone?
I think the media reaction has been almost uniformly positive, disregarding the kind of bigger picture stuff. But regarding picking a foreign coach, there's been really very little blowback, which is quite interesting, right? Because, as you say, this is a real sea change for Brazilian football that's always kind of resisted that urge to appoint a foreign coach. Even as recently as 3-4 years ago, there was resistance to that. There were, there's been an influx of foreign coaches into the Brazilian domestic game, many of them Portuguese, some of them very successful, like Jorge Jesus, who did very well at Flamengo. You've got Abel Ferreira, who's doing very well at Palmeiras. The two best coaches in the Brazilian domestic game over the last 7-8 years have been foreign. And I think, maybe prior to Chichi's departure, there would have been a kind of resistance, like, oh, come on, we can still find someone. But I think the succession of failures, particularly in the last 3 years, has got rid of that, I guess, more patriotic, nationalistic idea. Certainly among the media. I think if you broaden that out to the, it's hard to generalise over 210 million people, but I think there's probably a touch more resistance when it comes to the general public. My sample size is quite small, but I'm in a Brazilian family WhatsApp group, for example, and which represents a slightly less forward-thinking approach to the Brazilian game, and there has been a little bit of why couldn't we appoint a Brazilian? But I think that now is probably the lowest it's ever been in terms of that viewpoint.
And what specific issues will Ancelotti inherit with this team? Because in the last couple sections, Taylor, Joe and I have been talking about Real Madrid and some of the issues that Xabi Alonso is going to inherit from Carlo Ancelotti. And as an outsider who has a kind of superficial understanding of where Brazil are as a team, feels like he might inherit some of the same issues that Real Madrid have had this season, and in personnel will inherit literally a good number of the same players. So what will he have to do to get this team competitive ahead of the World Cup?
At least Kylian Mbappe can't jump ship, right? If he could join Brazil, we'd be in a lot of trouble for Carlo.
There's no Mbappe and there's no Florentino Perez, and I think that's probably to Ancelotti's benefit. But yeah, like you say, I wrote a piece about this today on The Athletic. It will go up soon, and this is one of the great ironies of it, is that, particularly the last 3-4 months, right? Ancelotti has been, the main question over his management of Real Madrid has been, can you keep picking these 4 attacking players and not really having a midfield? That is something that he's going to come up against again with Brazil in particular. Just looking at, the most recent match, Brazil's defeat to Argentina, Brazil essentially just didn't have a midfield. Like it was zero midfield. There was André, who plays for Wolves, and there was Joelinton, and they're okay. They're not bad players, but against those two, Argentina had like 5 central midfielders, and it was just a complete mismatch in the centre of the park. And that's something that has been a kind of lingering theme for Brazil, is this imbalance, this inability to find a good combination in midfield. So I think that's probably the first thing. I think it looks like Casemiro is going to come back in from the fold. Obviously, Ancelotti knows him well. He maybe will be the kind of destroyer, maybe let Bruno Guimarães be a little bit more attacking. But again, you're still looking for a third player there, and it's not obvious there is someone. I think in attack, even aside from, do you play 3 attackers, 4 attackers, the big part of it will be unlocking Vini Jr. and Rodrigo, neither of whom really have played their best football at international level. Vinicius in particular has been very stop-start in his international career, has been nowhere near as good for Brazil as he has been for Real Madrid. You've also got Rafinha, obviously, kind of the same. He's been a little bit better than the other two. Then you've got Neymar, who's still kind of knocking about and still seen within the setup as part of Brazil's future rather than its past, which is interesting. He was in the last squad before he got injured, and it's not clear, probably won't be fit to play these first couple of qualifiers, but there's no sense that Brazil are kind of post-Neymar, so that's interesting. That's both from a kind of selection perspective, is he good enough, where does he play, but also from talking about power dynamics. So Neymar has always had this kind of centre of gravity and everything revolves around him. Is Ancelotti going to be okay with that? And then I guess fullbacks is the other thing that stands out. Brazil historically has been like the home of great fullbacks, and the cupboards are really bare, and they have been for quite a while now. So yeah, it's quite a long to-do list, to be honest.
So we've got a goalkeeper and some centre backs, though. We're feeling okay there.
We've got Alisson and we've got Marquinhos, and good luck with the rest of it, Carlo.
So with those issues then, like, known and pretty identified, and having been an issue for the recent string of managers, what is the level of expectation then with Carlo Ancelotti coming in? Is it he has the pedigree, he has the established reputation, we should be challenging for, if not winning, a World Cup? Or is it sort of a, we hope he can get some semblance of a performance out of this team?
Again, I think there is more realism than there has been probably than any point that I've followed Brazil. I think partly that is just because they've been so bad for so long. You know, you can't keep seeing yourself as the sovereign nation in football when you've not really come close to winning the World Cup for 20 odd years, right? So I think that has gradually faded away over time, and now there is this kind of acceptance, really. And I don't think you would ask 100 Brazilians if they expect to win the World Cup. I don't think that many would respond positively. On the other hand, by the time the World Cup rolls around, there's a phrase in Brazil: Brazil either wins World Cups or they lose them, right? If Brazil don't win a World Cup, it's a failure. That, of course, comes with its own pressure. It's an incredibly intense job for that reason. And so what usually happens is that even when expectations are moderate or modest, the tournament starts. And if, Ancelotti and Brazil go out at the quarterfinal stage, it's a national crisis again. So there's a very thin line between abject failure and glory, and it's the line is probably between the quarters and the semi-finals. The quarterfinals would be the end of the world. The semi-finals, maybe they could accept that, but it's still not a World Cup.
Which manager, who's the most recent manager, I should say, that you think did the best job of sort of balancing expectation, getting the team playing a coherent style, and still having some of the Brazilian flair? Because if it's been an issue for so long, does it go back to early 2000s? Is that the last time you felt like they had I shouldn't say a competent manager, but maybe a manager capable of blending those things?
Well, big can of worms. So this is one of the particularities of Brazilian football culture, is that winning is both winning and style are both of fundamental importance, right? And it depends. It depends who you ask and when you ask them. And so, take for example, I'll round back to your actual question in a minute. 1994, a successful World Cup winning side, but a very ugly side, not particularly beloved, and even that success was seen as a kind of a break from the past. So the last time that there was complete unanimity over Brazil being aesthetically pleasing, something that the whole country can get behind, was probably 1982. And that failure kind of prompted them to become a bit more defensive and a bit more pragmatic. The last competent manager, I think, was Chichi. I think he was a very competent manager. He took a Brazil side that had lurched between crises, the 2014 World Cup being the obvious example, but after that World Cup, after that historic failure against Germany, the Brazilian Federation, which, we could do about 4 podcasts on how hilarious that federation is. The Brazilian Federation turned back to Dunga, who had been a failure a couple of years earlier. And those kind of, 2014 to 2016 is a completely wasted period for Brazil. Chichi takes hold of that, turns the team into a functional team. It's not the most thrilling team, but it's extremely well drilled, and it is modern. It's a modern team. It's kind of, Chichi was very, he was someone who looked to Europe. He went and did, months at a time with the top European coaches. Carlo Ancelotti actually was his idol, and he spent a lot of time with Ancelotti at Madrid. But he was someone who was kind of outward looking, turned Brazil from a basket case into a team that was a little bit unlucky at two World Cups. So they probably could have gone a little further in 2018, lost to Belgium in what was probably the match of the tournament, and in Qatar came undone against Croatia after a game that really could have gone either way. So, we're not talking about one of the best sides ever, but a team that could feasibly have reached a World Cup final if things had gone their way, even won it. On the other hand, by the end of the Chichi reign, they had this big backlash against him saying, oh, this guy's too European, this guy's turned us into a kind of a team of technocrats. And then harking back again to what about the old days of the 1982? So really, when you're the Brazil manager, there's no winning. That is the bottom line of it.
Sounds a lot like Real Madrid as a club, so maybe that's where Carlo Ancelotti will be better equipped than most to deal with the expectation and the pressure. Jack, what's the expectation of how long this job is for Ancelotti? Is this, obviously we've spent a lot of time since last year talking about Pochettino in the US job, which I think most people expect this will be a one and done for him with the World Cup. Is it the same for Ancelotti? Is there any indication of how long this project is for him?
Well, the only indication at the moment is the length of the contract, which runs out after the World Cup. So, I mean, what that says to me is that they want to keep their options open, keep the options on the table. I mean, the interesting thing really is that I would actually say he's more likely to leave if Brazil win the World Cup. Oddly, because if Brazil win the World Cup, why would he stay? Brazil will win the World Cup. He drops the mic, waltzes off on holiday or to Saudi Arabia or whatever it is, as the greatest manager of all time. Full stop. I mean, whether that would be good. This is something in one of the columns in the Brazilian papers this week in O Globo. One of their big sports writers was like, actually, you know what? Winning the World Cup might counterintuitively might be the most damaging thing to Brazil, because there would be no lessons learned from this stupid process. We'd have won it by bringing a big name in at the last minute, which kind of is the most by numbers basic way to run a national team. Christ, who can we get in now? I'll get Carlo Ancelotti in. He's won it, brilliant. Which would kind of paper over cracks. So, yeah. If Brazil don't win it, will he stay? I would suggest it depends on whether it's kind of a moderate disaster or a huge disaster. So, honestly, I don't know. But I would imagine that if he, let's say, takes them to a semi-final, that might be enough encouragement to stay and build, while not being a big enough achievement for him to just walk out in a blaze of glory.
Is there a federation that isn't papering over the cracks? There's got to be one somewhere, right? It feels like every single one around the world is generally under fire for maybe not covering themselves in glory consistently. Yeah,
that's true. Maybe federation president is just a losing game. But I mean, Brazil's is spectacularly dysfunctional. Even by all those, we've got people being lifetime bans for corruption. There was a guy about 6-7 years ago who was president of the CBF, and then footage emerged of him stealing a medal from a kids' football tournament. The guy who's currently in the job, is being investigated now by the Brazilian Supreme Court for what supposedly he's accused of having falsified documents relating to his re-election by signing on behalf of someone who was mentally incapacitated. And that's happening now. That's literally being investigated now. So there are levels to this game.
Yeah. So if they can't win the World Cup this year, they can at least win the Dysfunctional Leadership World Cup. They've got that locked down, is what you're saying?
I think they're reigning champs. Come on.
Well, that feels like a very good note to end on, because my final question was going to be, if Brazil win the World Cup, does that cement Carlo Ancelotti as the greatest manager ever? I feel like you've already answered that one. So thank you very much for answering that and all of our many other questions. Jack, greatly appreciated. Unless you would like to amend that statement. If you'd like to give Sir Alex Ferguson his flowers, or Jurgen Klinsmann
from this discussion, Steve Clark leads us to the World Cup. I think his name deserves a mention. So
I'll leave the statement there. It may come back to bite me, but we'll see how we go.
All right. So Carlo Ancelotti, then Steve Clark. Cool. Got that on record. And then somewhere now down near the bottom, Dorival Jr. and Fernando and Denise as well. But Jack Lang, thank you one more time for taking the time to chat with us today. And hopefully you keep your sanity with 2 children running around and balancing international football all at once. I believe you can.
I'll do my best. Thanks a lot.
And Graham, you do fine on that front too. Listeners, thank you all. I'm sure you all do a great job of that as well. We appreciate you listening. We'll talk to you again very soon.